Welcome to Vineyard Boise. It's our vision to make the invisible God visible wherever He places us. We come together on Sundays to worship and fellowship corporately. But we know that church isn't just about Sunday. It's about a lifelong, day-to-day following of Christ with other believers. We invite you to join us, just as you are. If you'd like to support our ministry, visit vineyardboise.org and click the Give Online button.
This morning is part 2 of actually a 4-part series. And actually, we always begin a new year with kind of a vision cast. It's a vision for the coming year. And this year, we've actually broken it into 4 parts. We'll actually be covering it for all 4 weeks. So if you weren't here last week, today doesn't stand alone. It actually builds on last week. So we've made last week's message really accessible. If you go to just the front page of our website, you'll see this pop up, this 2018 Vision Cast. If you click on that, it'll take you directly to that message from last week. And by chance, if that pop-up doesn't work, if you've got pop-ups that's disabled or something on your browser, at the very top of the screen, there's a second link. Right across that green bar, there's also a link right there. So two ways from the front page that you can get to that message. And I would really encourage you to do that because today's message won't entirely make sense apart from that. I'm going to do a brief recap, but I'm not going to be comprehensive with it. So encourage you to do that. And I just want to say this. Please, if you consider this to be your home church, if this is your faith community, or if you're considering making this your faith community, I'm asking you to really intentionally give us the next 4 weeks. I don't think that in my leadership here that I have ever been a part of a more important series because this is not just vision for 2018. It's really vision for a new season that we're moving into as a church. And we're excited about it. Our leadership team is just on fire with what God's doing. We're having fun. And there's not been a more significant time for us than this. So give us this next 4 weeks, and we'll go into it together. So this morning's message is actually titled Uncharted Territory, going into uncharted territory. And this morning we're specifically looking at the who. We're going to be looking at Joshua 1, chapter 8. So that little phrase, uncharted territory, that comes from a metaphor that we introduced last week. And I'll recap it briefly. The metaphor was this, and it's kind of why we have this canoe up here and the compass and some of these elements, the travel, suitcases, the cargo trunk, stuff like that. Here's the image. Lewis and Clark expedition. The Lewis and Clark expedition was a corps of discovery that was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson. And what they were to do was to explore the unexplored western edge, beyond the western edge of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, so they came to a defining moment when they had to confront, I'm looking this way because they were going west, they had to confront that everything in front of them was not what they expected, that all of their models for what they had been trained, for what they had experienced, was not going to be relevant in the place they were going. And so the terrain that was in front of them, all their models were entirely wrong. Last week we summarized it like this. They were confronting and adapting their expectations. Their expectation, based on the collective thought of over 300 years of exploration and even science, was that at the western edge of the Louisiana Purchase, they would find the Continental Divide. It was to be the watershed, the spine of the Rocky Mountains, beyond which they would find a western flowing water source through a gradual plain that would carry them all the way to the Pacific. Okay? In other words, basically, they believed that the unexplored geography in front of them would be very similar to the familiar geography behind them. And so with that in mind, they carried canoes. They carried canoes thinking they were going to find a western flowing water source that would allow them to just basically take a quick and easy path all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But here's the thing. They got to that Continental Divide, that ridge where they were expecting to see this gentle plain, and instead what they saw was mountains as far as the eye could see, giant snow-capped mountains. They did not find a gradual plain, and here they were faced with a choice. They could either turn back, and this was a moment that they had to make a very intentional choice. They could either turn back, they could go back to Jefferson and report that there was a different type of expedition that was required, that it would be people with a different kind of training that would be required to go on that expedition, and they could just go back. Or they could move forward into uncharted, unknown territory, that they could learn to adapt and say, you know what, we're going to figure this out as we go. So the metaphor is this, and here's why we introduced that. The metaphor is this, that Christian leaders and churches of today, talking about 21st century America, Christian leaders and churches of today find ourselves at a very parallel moment. Sociologists and theologians refer to this as the passing of Christendom. So, passing of Christendom, we find it this way. There has been a seismic and fundamental shift in our culture. America is now a post-Christian nation. And all of our experience, all of our training, all our models for how to do ministry in the past did not prepare us for the world in which we now live. Okay, this is the same shift that happened in Europe over the last 2 generations. We're catching up to Europe right now with that. So let me just say, this is kind of an aside. My point this morning and last week as well is not to do a post-mortem on those 1700 years. 1700 years that included America, but was also the Western world. It was, going back to Rome, and it was Europe, Western Europe. We're not doing a post-mortem to talk about whether or not Christendom was a largely positive thing or a largely negative thing. The reality is you can't paint it with one brush like that because it was both. And as much as there was very great things that happened in society as a result of Christian influence during that 1700 years and Christianity having that privileged place at the center of cultural influence, there was a lot of good that was done, and there was also a lot of damage that was done. There was there was an abuse of power, there were injustices that were committed in the name of Christianity. And so we can't look back and say, well, it was all good or it was all bad. It was mixed. And this morning, we're not here to actually talk about that. That's beyond the scope of our purposes. But it's important that we acknowledge that because we get a choice in terms of what we create moving forward. So we're not here to pass judgment on whether it's positive or negative, in the same way that we're not here to pass judgment on the Lewis and Clark expedition. There was also some negative things that happened there. We're not trying to model ourselves after the Lewis and Clark expedition. We're simply looking at that metaphor of them standing at the ridge of the Continental Divide, looking out into an unknown future and deciding where they're going to go. So here's where we come to. The Church of America now stands at our own Continental Divide, gazing into a cultural terrain that's uncharted territory. Okay, our uncharted territory, it's not geographical, it's cultural. It's an uncharted territory, and we have a choice. Here's a choice, listen to this. Will we hunker down in retreat and nostalgia for the past, or will we allow God to lead us in adapting both our mission and our model to be relevant and effective in the new world in which we find ourselves? That's the question. If you can take any way think from this imagery, it's of the fact that they realized their canoes weren't relevant. They'd served them in the past, and they thought they were going to be helpful in the future. They realized a moment when they said, you know what, this isn't going to be helpful for what we need in the future. And they had to let go, and they had to be willing to adapt. And in the same way, we're standing kind of on our cultural divide, looking into the West. And as a culture, this is not just Vineyard Boise, but this is the Church of America. We've got to decide what are we going to do to respond in a post-Christian America. I'll tell you, for our part, this is where our leadership team has landed firmly, is we want to go west. We want to follow God into the uncharted territory because God, though we don't know, we've not gone this way before, is the language of Joshua, the God who goes before us is sovereign and powerful, and he can take us into places that we don't know how to get yet. He can help us to reach people that previously have been unreached and would stay unreached if we stick to our old models. So we're wholeheartedly saying we're going west. And this morning, what I want to cover is just 2 things, 3 brief questions having to do with the who of a people going into an uncharted territory. It's, first of all, who goes into the uncharted territory? Who is it that goes? Whom do we hope to encounter there? And who goes before us? Okay? Who goes? Who do we hope to encounter? Who goes before us? So we're going to be picking up in the book of Joshua. As a church, typically we study through books of the Bible. We alternate between New Testament and Old Testament. It's time for us to go back to the Old Testament and pick up where we left off. So we last studied Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy was our last Old Testament study. And so now we're picking up in the book of Joshua. And so as we resume our study, we're going to do some character studies over the next several weeks in Joshua, in Judges, and in Ruth. And as we pick up from where we left off last time, there's been a leadership transition. Okay, there's been about 40 years that we've kind of, we're skimmed over during Numbers, a few highlights, maybe lowlights that were reported. But we're picking up now with the second generation of Israel. So when we talk about the second generation of Israel, we're talking about the people that were led by God out of the people of Egypt. Okay, so the first generation was led by Moses. As we resume the story, Moses has died, and there's now a second generation, and now his servant Joshua is leading the people. So Joshua and the people, put up a map here. Joshua and the people there encamped just above the Dead Sea to the east of the Dead Sea. They're in the plains of Moab, just east of the Jordan. So the Jordan River for them, okay, catch this is their continental divide. This is their watershed where everything in front of them is new territory, uncharted territory, and it's different than the world that they've left. On the other side of the Jordan is the Promised Land. It's the uncharted territory that looks nothing like the wilderness they've grown up in. I'll show you the second map here. This is where they've grown up. This would be down to the south of that first map. They've grown up in that peninsula. It's a wilderness. It's the Sinai Peninsula. And because of some things that happened in the previous generation, for 40 years, the people of Israel, first and second generation, wandered in that wilderness. And God met them there. It was actually a time that when they look back on it in the Israel or Hebrew history, they look back at it as a time where God tenderly met their needs. And yet it was also a time of desert. It was a time of barrenness. It was a time when the people discovered how much sinfulness was in their hearts as a people. And so they've spent all their time there. And the reality is, though we don't think of the desert as a comfortable place, it had become their comfort zone because it's what they knew. Right? And so now even though they're looking into a land that is full of promise, it's stretching their comfort zone because they just don't know what to expect there. Today we're going to be in Joshua 1, verses 1 through 9. On the PowerPoint, we're just going to read through it briefly. It's 9 verses, but I've highlighted the parts that are especially relevant. So just pay attention to those and then we'll circle back to them. We're going to pick up in Joshua 1:1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore, arise. Go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand against you or before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous. Then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." This is God's word. So we're going to take a moment to look at the who of a people that are going into uncharted territory. So first of all, who goes into the uncharted territory? Did you see that in the passage? It's you and all this people. All right, the commission for their generation, it was not just for Joshua or Joshua and the leaders. It was for the entire congregation, the entire nation of Israel. Nobody gets left behind. This was an all-in moment. It was a moment of full engagement where in order for them to realize the promises that God had for them, it was going to take the full engagement of the entire congregation of Israel. This includes, now this is worth noting, this includes both Caleb and Joshua. Now, there was something unique happening in that first generation of Israel, and that is that, I said because of something that happened in the first generation, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And what had happened is the first generation had come pretty quickly from the time they left Egypt. Pretty quickly, they had arrived at the edge of the promised land, and at the edge of the promised land, they'd sent 12 spies into the promised land to kind of scope out the terrain to see what to expect. And 10 of them came back with what they've called an evil report. They came back with a narrative of fear. And when they spoke that into the people, they said, yeah, it's a good place, but it's a dark place. It's full of giants. We can't go in there. Like, God has led us into a bad place. And they spoke a narrative of fear into the people. And the language of Scripture, you can find this in Numbers 13 and 14. The language of Scripture is that it caused the hearts of the people to melt. The way they spoke was like gangrene in the hearts of the people. And so the people turned back. And because of that, God said, okay, if you don't want to go into the promised land, I'll take your children. You can wait in the wilderness. And when you're all gone in the wilderness, then I'll take your children in. So that's the leadership that's happened. There's two exceptions. Joshua and Caleb were part of the first generation, and they actually get to go into the promised land. And the reason why is because when their 10 peers spoke a narrative of fear, they came back with a narrative of faith. And while some only saw the things that were scary, they saw those same things. They said, yeah, there's giants, but our God's bigger. Remember how God led us out of Egypt? Remember what he did in the wilderness? Do you think that he can't do the same thing there? He's not territorial. He's not limited to Egypt. The same God that led us back then can lead us into an uncharted territory. And they came back with a narrative of faith, and God said, you get to go into the promised land. So now, as we pick up, it's 40 years later. Caleb is now 85. We don't know Joshua's exact age. He's probably around the same age. Caleb's 85, and you know what he does at this moment when they're getting ready to go? He asks for the most difficult assignment. He says, nobody else wants to take the hill country. Give it to me. It may be that God will give it to us. There's an older generation that's filled with faith. That's powerful. And so the faith-filled first generation who have stories of God's power and faithfulness help lead the way for those who go in. Joshua and Caleb lead the way. So for us, here's what this means. For us, full engagement with God's purposes for our part of his story means that we need to be a multi-generational, multi-ethnic core of discovery. Okay, let me unpack that statement. That's a packed statement. Let me unpack that a little bit. What does this mean? It means we need the young people to be fully engaged right now. We need the youth that Sharon was just addressing in that video. We need you, if you are youth in this church, we need you to help lead right now, because as we step into a culture that is different for many of us, it's the culture you've grown up in. It's the water you automatically swim in. You don't even know it's the culture, right? Because it's just what you've known. And so as we talk about, there's ministry models, there's canoes that we used in the past, things that we did that were very effective and actually excited us in the past, but they're no longer effective or even inspiring for us. We need you to help us to figure out models that work in the coming culture. And so youth, we need your creativity. We need your just attentiveness. We need you to be listening to God and figuring out how do we go into an uncharted territory. You are going to lead the way in that. If you are youth, we need you, okay? We're not waiting for you to lead in the future, 20 years from now. We need you to help lead now. The other side of that is we need you gray hairs. Or as we say in the vineyard, vintage. We need you vintage vineyard. And here's why. Because you have more wisdom. You have more experience and understanding of God's nature to lean into. There's more stories where you've seen God's faithfulness. You can lead and speak into our life together in a way that awakens and stirs faith when we're facing new giants. In the same way that Caleb was able to have a narrative of faith and say, because of what I've seen God do in the past, I can have faith for this future. And Caleb says, come with me, I'll take the most difficult territory. And those of you who have walked with God for longer than others of us, you get to choose, how do you speak about the future? And do you help create a narrative of faith? We would ask you to do that because we need people to follow who've seen God's faithfulness, not just once, but many times over the years. Here's the thing. Our new table environment actually helps facilitate this. It gives us an opportunity to interact across generations in a way that we never will in rows. You've heard me say this new thing that we've done with getting rid of our rows of chairs and meeting at tables, that it's not the vision. Our vision is not to be a table full of churches. Or a church full of tables. It's not that either. Our vision is not to be a church full of tables. That's a very small vision. But the tables, it helps facilitate our vision. It's a model of meeting together that better facilitates our vision. And so already what we're hearing reports back of people saying, you know what? I sat with people at my table that were much younger than me. People that I never would have talked to otherwise. Like, we tend to be drawn to people who are like us. We tend to be drawn according to affinity. And so, but we said we were sitting at this table and it would be awkward to not talk, so we talked to them. And we actually had a really good connection. In just this brief moment, over our greeting time and over some discussion at the end, we actually really connected, and it was wonderful. Okay? That's what we're talking about. These tables can foster that multi-generational aspect. And so I'd encourage you, when you're thinking about where you sit on a Sunday morning, you can sit with people you know and like, but I would encourage you to leave space for people that are not part of your in circle already as well. Because it's a chance to connect with people, and we need that multi-generational aspect. We need our youth speaking into our lives and helping us figure out culturally relevant models for reaching the world. And we need you seasoned people to speak faith to us, to say, hey, here's some wisdom that I've learned over the years. Okay? Secondly, it says multi-ethnic. The tables also foster racial diversity. They have a potential to foster racial diversity and to erase the lines that divide us in a time when many are drawing lines. Let me repeat that. The tables have the potential to foster racial diversity and to erase the lines that divide us in a time when many others are drawing lines. I had a discussion with a friend this week, actually email-based, but it was still a discussion. And he said, that morning, it was just a couple months ago, we had a whole morning where we talked about racial diversity, racial division, and how is the church called to bring healing to that in a time when it seems like it's actually being stirred up in our nation. It seems like we're moving backwards rather than forwards as it relates to racism. He said, that morning we talked about that. I wonder how much different it would look if we were sitting at tables. Because we could have actually, rather than just sitting in rows listening to somebody else talk about it, we could have actually engaged with one another. We could have shared some of our, inhibitions. I shared with you that morning. I was pretty transparent. I shared with you some of my own stuff. I said we could have shared some of our own stuff. We could have, if we were sitting at a table that was diverse, we could have actually looked each other in the eye and valued one another. These tables have the potential to create a welcoming space where if we want to be a welcoming church, if we want to heal some of the stuff that's going on, we can actually do that at the tables because we can welcome one another. So there's so much power in this model that we didn't have in rows. For most of us, and I'll acknowledge this, for most of us, this stretches our comfort zone. You can raise your hand. Does this stretch your comfort zone? It does. Even that idea, like, if I'm at a table with somebody of a different ethnic origin than myself, and we kick it to tables and say, hey, how are we doing as a nation with this? How are we doing as a city with this? I'd have to talk to somebody else, and it could be awkward. So that's a comfort zone. But here's the thing. And one of our staff members said this to us the other week. We were talking about comfort zones, and he said, you know what? This was Chris Trump said this to us. He said, comfort zones don't keep us safe. They keep us small. So I acknowledge this is stretching our comfort zones, but we need our comfort zone stretched. And if we're going to come against some of the racism and the division that's happening in our nation, at every sphere of our nation, it does happen in Boise, it's happening around the globe, it's happening around our nation, it's happening in our politics, it's happening from our Oval Office. Like there's some horrible things, and somebody's got to come against it in love. Next point, whom do we hope to encounter? In Joshua's generation, God was delivering on the promise that he had made to a previous generation. He said, remember, did you catch that? I underlined it in the text. It said, everything that I'm going to take you into this place, everything that I promised to Moses, I'm giving to you. And so as we talk about this, their inheritance was geographical. They were literally going into the promised land. It was land that God had promised, actually not just to Moses, but you could go back some like 500 years to Abraham. And God was delivering. He was generationally delivering on the promise that he'd made. So I've been asking the question for years now, if God, sometimes the way that God works is he delivers promises not just to the generation he makes them to, but his faithfulness is seen sustained over generations. And so when we were studying through Joshua during our leadership transition as a church, from our founding pastor to our current team, one of the things that we were asking is, God, what did you promise to the first generation that we haven't yet seen fulfilled? And one of the promises, there's other things that I could talk about. One of the promises is God told Tri at the very beginning of the church, like this is back in like 1989 or 1990, he said, Vineyard Boise is to be a church of 5,000 disciples. Now, we don't know, is that 5,000 people that meet on a Sunday morning? Is that 5,000 people in membership? Well, that's hard to quantify because we don't really have membership. So, here's what we know. We haven't reached it yet. It's a number that's big enough that we can aspire to it, and we haven't reached it yet. And we know that it's disciples, not attenders. It's not a crowd of 5,000 people. It's not 5,000 people listening. It's 5,000 participants, people engaging in the mission of God, growing together in being Christ-like, letting God form Christ in us, and then going out into the world to make more disciples. So that said, our inheritance is not geographical. It's not more land. It's biographical. It's people. That's the promise God has made to the first generation. That means that the world out there, the world outside of the walls of our training room here, we're changing this. We're not calling it a sanctuary. We're calling it a training room. Sanctuary is safe. That's a good thing. Our training rooms can be safe too. But training room or sanctuary is not missional. Sanctuary doesn't say, okay, now let's go make the invisible God visible. It says, let's hunker down in safety. We want to stay safe. We're going to be a safe place here, and we want to be missional. We want to go out from here. So that means the world out there, outside the walls of our training room, a world of people who don't have a personal relationship with Jesus that changes and shapes the way that they live. That world is not an enemy to be conquered. It is not a people to be disdained or hidden from or feared. It is a people to be loved. Our mission has always been go love people. And so that's the call on us. Go out there and love people, make disciples. Not an enemy to be conquered, disdained, or hidden from, but a people to be loved. We're called to reach others with the same love, the same hope, the same forgiveness, the same new life that has reached us. We're called to be an outpost of God's justice, breaking forth into human culture and spheres of injustice. We're called to be an outpost of God's love, drowning out the narratives of hate and fear. We're called to enjoy and savor God's love and mercy together, but not keep it to ourselves. We're called to share it. Okay? This is also an aspect of tables. Tables, again, they allow us to be more deliberate in creating an actual culture of hospitality and inclusiveness. That's what we're calling it, is a culture of hospitality and inclusiveness. Our culture is currently malnourished as it relates to relationship. Okay? Here's why these tables, these are not, we had tables at the beginning of our church. When I first joined the church in the late 80s, early 1990, when I joined the vineyard up on Northview, there was little tables about this size. They were more like the 3 or 2.5 foot size. But we had tables. As we move into the future, as we head west into uncharted territory, we're not getting tables because we want to go back. We're getting tables because we recognize this is a cultural need. I had a conversation with another friend a while back, and he was talking about his grandchildren. And at the time, he and his wife were hosting their grandchildren for a sustained period of time. And he said, you know what? The problem with my granddaughter is we're trying to feed her really healthy things that she can thrive on, but she just wants Cheerios. And that's all she eats is Cheerios. And he goes, the thing is it satiates her hunger to the point where she doesn't then want something else, like vegetables or protein or other things that would help her. It satiates it just enough that she's not hungry, but it's not something she can thrive on. You can't thrive on a sustained diet of Cheerios, right? In the same way, a lot of the interaction we have, we are drowning in relationship. We connect with each other all the time with our devices, with our computers. We're socially overwhelmed, and it's relational Cheerios, right? It is. It's enough. That's Greg's metaphor, not mine. It's enough to satiate our relational need to where we go home at night and we don't want to interact with anybody else because we've been doing it all day. But it hasn't been deep, right? It's enough that it takes the edge off, but it hasn't been deep. We need face-to-face time with people. So part of this table time is just awakening that hunger that we need that face-to-face time. So when people come in here and their comfort zones are stretched, we get to say, you know what? We get to connect relationally. We get to look you in the eye. Maybe you'll get a chance to invite somebody out to lunch after church. Here's the thing. Just sitting at a table, the sphere of connection for you at a table may just be that wait, there's 8 chairs at a table. We're not asking you to interact with 1,000 people, just the other 7. Worst case scenario, 7 people. Maybe a need shows up. Maybe somebody shares, this is what's going on in my life this week. And maybe it's your invitation to meet that need. I did a funeral this year, a memorial service for an amazing man who was part of this church, Dave Henderson. The way he lived his life is that if he encountered a need, he assumed that it was his need to meet. He didn't say, well, God, would you want me to meet that need? And if you write it on the wall, I'll do it. His assumption was that if he encountered the need, it was his to meet. You may have a chance to minister in a significant way on a Sunday just because you open your table to somebody else. I'm going to invite Kim Gray to come up. Kim, where are you? Would you come up? Here she comes. Would you guys welcome Kim Gray? You don't know why you're welcoming her, but I'm going to tell you. Let me put up a picture. This is a picture of somebody I like to call Lori Thompson. Lori and her husband Rand and their kids, Life and Kedron, moved to Boise from that beautiful desert that is Lancaster and Palmdale, that area, in 1989 to be a part of our church plant. And they have been a faithful part of our church. Lori's been a part of our staff team since the very beginning. So almost 30 years now. Lori is the only member of the original planting team that's still on our staff. And she's going to be retiring, a well-deserved retirement that we actually can't replace who Lori is. She's actually irreplaceable. Yeah. Lori, because of who she is, has fingerprints all over this place. She has championed a culture of welcome, of hospitality, of beauty throughout our life together as a church. And so she's transitioning. And so this morning, here's the thing. As much as Lori likes throwing party for other people, she doesn't like being the center of the party. So much so that when we had a retirement party for her, we had to kidnap her and take her to it. And so she didn't want to be up on stage this morning, and so we're going to honor that. But I also want to give you the opportunity to honor her because she deserves to be honored. So would you just, Now, Lori's worn a lot of hats over the years. She's served wherever she was needed. That's part of her faithfulness. Her most recent leadership role has been leading our guest experience, our welcome team, our greeter team, our 101 experience. And so as she steps out of that, Kim Gray is going to be stepping into it. Kim also has a long history here, not as a staff member, but as actively engaged disciple who is led in many environments. And so Kim's going to be heading up our guest experience. So I asked her if she would share with us one idea this morning that she has about how we can foster and create a culture of welcome and hospitality here at the church. So Kim's going to share that. And what do you got?
Well, hello. Wow. You need to turn these lights off. I can't see anybody.
I like it that way. That way I don't know who I'm talking to.
I got it. Yeah. So first of all, I want to acknowledge all the introverts. It's a very foreign concept to me. I am married to an introvert, but I just want to acknowledge all of you guys because I know that this is probably especially awkward and uncomfortable. And so I just want you to know that. It would be like Trevor asking me to sit in silence and solitude. Oh, wait, you did. So I feel your pain. I absolutely feel your pain. It's a different situation, but the pain is the same, so I get it. But just, as I thought about, how do you invite people in and welcome them? And I'll tell you, the very first thing, as you're sitting at your tables or standing at your tables, the very first thing is a smile. Mm-hmm. A smile absolutely conveys a message that you're welcome here, and I acknowledge you, like I see you, because we want to be seen, and we want to be known. God's created us that way, and he's created us for connection. Mm-hmm. So even if you're an introvert, you're still created for connection. That's right. And so that doesn't change. So my suggestion is you just kind of find your tables and find your groove. If you're like me, switch it up every week, go to a different table, and smile and just either stand up and pull a chair out, invite somebody just like you would at your home, because this is like your home. Like if someone's coming to your door, when they knock, you answer, right? Unless you have a ring like I have, and then I don't have to because never mind, that's a whole nother thing. Anyway, but just, you all have great smiles, so, because I've seen them, I can see them right now. Everyone practice. Let's practice your smile. See? Anyway. Is that good?
That's awesome. Okay. Thank you, Kim. Yeah. So we're going to have a little conversation at the tables. And here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be deliberate right now because this is all new. And so we get to create a culture right now. We get to just be intentional about it. And I had lunch with Pastor Tri this week, and he shared with me that originally when we had tables, there was a point at which people became territorial with the tables. And rather than being a welcoming, it was like, mine, move. And that's not what we're after. So we want to be intentional about the culture we create. So here's a prompt. We're going to put this prompt up on the screen. Brainstorm just at your tables some ways in which we can create a culture of hospitality and inclusiveness in a room full of tables. And then someone at your table, would you just write them down? There's a paper right at your table that you can fill out. Write down your best ideas and leave them at the table. We'll gather them, and then next week we're going to report the top 10. Okay? All right. You may have multiple ideas. And I'd encourage you, something we've been noticing is when church is technically over, people have been sticking around talking at the tables. The tables create just a more welcoming environment. So if you've got more to add to that, please stick around and add to it. I just want to close this out with one point this morning. First of all, one point of housekeeping, and then one last point, answering the question, who goes before us. The housekeeping is this. When you come in, some of the chairs, by the nature of being at a round table, are facing away from the stage, and a lot of the morning happens at the stage. You're welcome to just take one of those chairs, turn it around, sit in it, and then when it's time for a table discussion, turn it back. We call that the stand and spin, okay? So you're welcome to do that, and that way you can leave the ones on the far side of the table for other guests. Here's the question. This is the most important of the whole morning. Most important of the whole morning. Who goes before us? And it was repeated over and over in that passage. It was repeated over and over. God said things like, do not be frightened, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you. Okay? Second generation of Israel, standing at the cultural divide, about to go across the Jordan. They're going into uncharted territory. God tells them 3 times, I am with you. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for I am with you. In just a moment in chapter 3, he's going to commission them to go across. And when he does, this is how he physically arranges the people. He sends the Ark of the Covenant that represented God's presence among the people. He sends that out far ahead enough of them that the entire nation can see we're following God's presence. They physically could see we're following that ark. Here's how it reads. As soon as you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits. Do not come near it in order that you may know the way you shall go. Don't get so close that you lose perspective that you're following God's presence. Here's why. For you have not passed this way before. He sent him into uncharted territory and he said, I'm going to lead you there. I'm going to give you strategies for places you've never reached. I'm going to help you to go into, to tear down fortresses that you've never had to deal with before. I'm going before you. I'm going to close with a quote. Last week I referenced a video, a message that our team heard from Gary Hagen that has really impacted us. And I've seen it probably 5 times now. This particular quote, the way he ends, never fails to inspire me and stir my heart, so I wanted to share it with you. Gary says, here's my second suggestion for you for how your dream can survive out there. Switch from playing defense to playing offense. No great dream of love has ever been built on the fear of what might go wrong. It is always built on the great and abundant hope of what might go right. So let me ask you this. Today, in this era, at your core, are you more impressed with what human beings are getting wrong in the world, or more impressed with what God is making right? Fundamentally, if we are more impressed with bad men than we are with a good God, then fear is going to eat our leadership alive. Honestly, I see so many leaders today churning up this narrative of fear. In this changing and tumultuous world, they now seem to see that their job is to protect their team and their territory from an onslaught of enemies and loss. They're totally playing defense. And you cannot lead forward in the pursuit of a great dream of love while you're retreating to a bunker of safety. It will not work. Here's the point. God is inviting his people to stop living in the joy-killing fear of playing defense in this world, to join him in actually playing offense. God is building his kingdom in the earth, and Jesus says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But so many Christian leaders have gotten themselves so disoriented in a narrative of fear and victimization that they act as if the gates of hell are advancing against them. But here's the thing about gates. They don't move around taking territory. Gates were built to keep advancing forces out. And what Jesus describes is that hell is what is desperately playing defense in the world. And against the advance of God's kingdom, the gates of hell cannot prevail. In light of that, we get to worship. I invite you to stand with me if you can. And we're going to close with one last song, turning our focus on the one that leads us. Not into victory, not to attack enemies, but to go love extravagantly well. Let's worship.
Death could not hold you. The veil torn before you. You silenced the bones down sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you were raised to life again. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. We're so grateful, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Let's give a hand to the Lord this morning. Hey, if you guys are here this morning and you just need just a prayer, encouragement, touch for somebody else, if you feel like you're stuck in that place where you feel like you need encouragement to advance to the things that God's promised your life, we're going to have prayer teams beneath both of the screens, and we have some words up as well. If any of these words relate to you, you need prayer for anything, we'd love to pray for you guys, that we would impart courage. That's what encouragement means, to impart courage to one another. We would love to do that for you guys. God bless you. Have a good Sunday.